tiny crumb of grace has the power to totally defeat the enemy. And this story is the biblical and theological evidence that that is true. My request to you is that you listen. If you're one of the guys here, I want you to choose, when you're observing the story, when you put yourself into it, I want you to hear what Jesus has to say, but I want you to put yourself in a position to listen to this woman as she enters into an argument. Yes, an argument with Jesus. By the way, she's never graced the door of a synagogue. She has never been known to have kept a Sabbath before this conversation. I'm going to tell you that she is a Canaanite. Syrophoenician is another word for Canaanite, which means she practices the Canaanite religion. Here she comes along, and guess who she meets? Jesus, the Savior of the world. This is a lively conversation. Let's get into the story. Jesus got up and went away from there to the region of Tyre. And when you say Tyre, I guess. And when he had entered a house, he wanted no one to know of it yet. He could not escape notice. He had become so well known, he could not sneak out of the country and get a vacation. And he got recognized. But after hearing of him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately came and fell at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syrophoenician race, and she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. Notice the word kept. She didn't just say, "You go do this, I know you can." She had to continuously appeal to Jesus. And she is begging for him to do this thing for her daughter. Now the conversation is going to change. It is going to get very interesting. And he was saying to her, now remember, she keeps saying this. This may not be the first time that he has said this, but now just listen carefully. Maybe you want to, at this moment, be one of the disciples, okay? If you want to be one of the disciples. In Matthew, in this story, you were trying to get rid of this woman, and you had just been telling her to get out of here and to leave. You did not want her here. So if you choose to be a disciple, that makes the perspective of the story even more interesting, because now Jesus not only has to contend with the issues that this woman has, he has to contend with the prejudice that exists in his disciples. So you get to choose to be a prejudicial disciple if you would like to. Okay, I know for some of you that's like almost impossible, but we all have prejudice, don't we? So kind of step into that moment with the disciples. Jesus continues, "Let the children be satisfied first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Now, most orators and preachers have said that he was calling this woman an evil dog. But did you notice the parentheses on the screen? It says little puppies. That's actually the correct translation. Little puppies. Did you notice how that changes the whole story? When Jesus said, "It is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little puppies." That is a pivotal point in the story, because this Canaanite woman, when she heard the term little puppies, okay, changes everything. Totally changes everything. And she gets it. Now I'm going to tell you, the disciples have not yet got it. Remember in Mark, they're always the last one to know what's going on. And as disciples today, can I just say that might be true of us? That sometimes we're always running just a little bit behind Jesus, trying to catch up. But this woman is listening by faith. But she answered him, and here's the argument. "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs, the little puppies," by the way, we have 6 here today, just saying. "The little puppies under the table feed on the children's crumbs." What kind of argument is that? What kind of argument? Would you be able to make an argument like that to Jesus? "I'll take a little crumb. I mean, we need something from you. We'll take anything. We'll take the smallest crumb of food that falls under the table as a Canaanite. We need some small thing from you." is what she's appealing to Jesus. In this story, consider who and what is against this woman. First of all, gender was against her culturally because women had little or no rights. It's almost changed in our culture and society. Women have more rights than what they used to, but they still don't have equal rights. Ethnicity was against her. She was a Canaanite or a pagan, worshipped who knows what gods by now in the Canaanite religion. Okay, that is against her. Satan is against her. He has control of her daughter. Go figure that out, would you? And the disciples are against her, trying to get her out of the room so she would leave Jesus alone. Everything, it appears in this story, is against this woman. But she has argued carefully, and listen carefully, for the faith that God has given to every human being, a measure of faith to every man, woman, and child. The faith that she has, listen carefully, has caused her to stand her ground, and the words she's listening to, she's listening through the gift of faith given to humanity, to the words of Jesus. Now, her faith may not be like yours where she goes to church every week, but she still has a measure of faith. It was promised to every person since the fall of Adam. And it is that faith that she is arguing on behalf of her daughter and the future, irregardless of who's against her. If God is for her, she cannot lose. Jesus was addressing the Jewish point of view for the disciples. To us, it sounds like bad dogs, but he was speaking in cultural language. He needed his disciples to know that he understood and identified with Jewish culture. But his language has changed enough, the little puppy aspect of the story, that this woman got exactly what Jesus was saying, and her hope began to grow immensely, and she is hanging on knowing that Jesus is still able to save her daughter. And he also used language like little puppies so that she could argue for grace for the smallest crumb. A crumb was big enough for God's power to deliver her daughter. Are you aware of that? How much grace do you need? Do you think you need enough grace that'll fill a semi out here? I mean, God pours grace out like that abundantly. How much grace do you need for these issues that come up in your life that just can't seem to go away, where the enemy just seems to have a foothold? How much grace do you need? And in this story, this woman will testify that just the smallest crumb of grace will deliver from the devourer, from the enemy, from Satan, those things that plague your life. Her faith was listening carefully to each word Jesus spoke. Can I just pause here for a moment? Her faith was listening to each word Jesus spoke. When you read your Bible, instead of just casually reading through, can you read through your faith and let the Word speak more deeply into your heart, into your life? I think there is a lesson for us there. Continuing in the story. And he said to her, this is awesome, because of this answer, go, the demon has gone from your daughter. Who won the argument? Who won the argument? This Canaanite woman, listening through the smallest amount of faith that she had in her life, begging for the smallest crumb of grace, has received a miracle from Jesus. So, let's go to the church board. How would you vote a miracle for this woman? Would you say, well, don't you think she ought to attend church for 2 or 3 months before we allow a miracle to happen? Don't you think that she had 26, 27 Bible studies before we let some really grand and special thing happen? I mean, how would we decide whether she was deserving of this miracle or not? You know, when she leaves here, this story, she goes home, it's not likely she's going to walk in the doors of the church. Did that impede Jesus from just simply speaking the word from his location to wherever home was and delivering her daughter from the powers of darkness? No, it did not. That's an amazing story. And going back to her home, she found the child laying on the bed, and the demon had left. Her faith listened, and in Matthew, she enters the Hall of Fame of the great people of faith. Okay? She is one of two that are acclaimed as the most marvelous faith of any human being Jesus ever met. It is this Canaanite woman, and you find that in the Gospel of Matthew, and it's the Roman centurion. You notice that no one else enters the Hall of Fame of faith except a Roman citizen that's pagan and a Canaanite woman, because they were exercising the gift of faith given to humanity, and they came to Jesus knowing that He alone, listen carefully, was able to save them in their situation. What is the lesson for us today? Is Jesus fully and completely adequate in every way? I mean, what list of good deeds did this woman do to earn the deliverance of her daughter? What does the list look like? Well, it's an interesting list. She had to get up, leave her house, and go all the way and look for the man she knew had just entered her village, find him, and then she had to go fall at his feet, which, may I say, could be interpreted as an act of worship. Isn't that interesting? That's the list. And then she was willing to stay there and not leave until she got a crumb of grace. Would you settle for a crumb of grace today? Would you? Is it big enough? Will it do what is necessary? You see what we can learn from pagans? We have a lot to learn, don't we? Centurion and this woman are the greatest demonstration of faith Jesus ever encounters. This is no ordinary story. This is not some casual story that you just read through and say, man, that was great in the day for her. That is a story that speaks volumes all the way down every day of history to this very moment to you. For you to embrace Jesus and be willing to worship Him, knowing that even the smallest act of Jesus is a grand and spectacular and beautiful thing of God in your life and in your family. It's a good story, isn't it? We have a second story, and we have 20 minutes to get through it. I'll try to take my time. Again, Jesus went out from the region of Tyre and came along to Sidon, to the Sea of Galilee within the region of Decapolis. Verse 32, they brought to him one who was deaf and spoke with difficulty, and they implored him to lay his hand on them. Now, you're about to get into some very interesting medical story here. Okay? And we have some medical professionals here, so I just want you to notice that in this story, Jesus is going to take traditional medicine and the power of God, and He's going to merge them. Can I say that to you again? Jesus is going to take what would be traditional medicine. Now, some people say, oh, we don't want anything to do with modern medicine. Jesus had no problem recognizing medical tradition and then mixing that with divine power. That is respect to the medical community by Jesus. Did you know there was a couple of stories like that? This is just one of two of them, where those two come together. And when those two come together and you have good medical care and you have prayer, some pretty incredible things can happen. I have a sister who works for St. Luke's, and it's not above her to just say, hey, how are you today? Hey, can I just have prayer with you? And she says, it's amazing how many people say yes. And she prays with them. And they become long-lasting friends. Actually, some of the people even here from this valley. They brought him one who was deaf and spoke with difficulty. Now, keep those two things in mind. Jesus took him aside from the crowd. By the way, when you go to the doctor, where do you go to get seen? Takes you out of the waiting room, right? Where does he take you? Off into one of those little rooms, right? Are you with me on this? I'm not trying to say that's what Jesus is doing here, but what I'm saying is Jesus took this man, took him out of the main crowd, takes him off, just the two of them there. Now listen carefully. He took him aside from the crowd by himself, put his fingers in his ears after spitting, he touched his tongue with saliva, and looked up to heaven with a deep sigh, and said to him, Ephphatha. That is, be opened. Remember the blind man where Jesus took spittle and mud and put it on his eyes? Did you know that was a common medical procedure? Okay? They saw that. And here Jesus takes us and does this really strange thing. Now, I have never known anyone to read this passage and open up a spittle clinic. Have you? Okay? Thank goodness. Can we all say, yeah, amen to that? Are we happy? Okay. I'm not sure everybody would run to be there. But in this case, for this man, in this moment, what do you suppose was going to happen? It says in verse 35, his ears were opened and immediately his tongue was removed and he began to speak plainly. Can you give me the list of all the good things this man did trying to get to Jesus to earn the right to be healed? Can anybody tell me what that list looks like? Let's back up here. What's the list look like in verse 32? Here's the list. Here's what it took. What does his list look like in 32? Can you read that? It says, they brought him one. The friends had to bring him. He wasn't even willing to go on his own. His friends brought him. Are you with me on this? That's the list. That's the qualifier. Someone had to bring him to Jesus. He didn't make any promises. I'll never sin again. He didn't make a list of all the good deeds. I'm going to help the poor. And he didn't give a list of all the promises he was going to make to God if he got healed. It just required friends who knew Jesus well enough to bring their friend and bring him into the presence of Jesus and say, would you please take care of my friend? That's the list that qualified him to be healed. Pretty small list, isn't it? What does your list look like when you go to God and want something really big from him? What kind of promises do you make? What kind of negotiations and agreements do you make? Oh, I promise I'll never overeat at lunch at church. No, I'm only kidding. That's really bad. Okay, because there's some really good stuff down there. And the Sabbath is a feast day for some. Okay? They brought him one who was deaf and spoke with difficulty, and they implored him to lay his hand on him. That's the list. Are you catching on to how Mark sees the power of Jesus? Remember, Mark is not writing for Jewish believers. Mark is writing his story for the Gentile, the Greco-Roman citizens. He is writing them to introduce them to the man Jesus. And so he's writing in very plain, very simple, very straight up language. He wants them to meet the Jesus he knows. And in every one of these stories, every act that Jesus performs on the behalf of a human being is not attached to a single behavior. It is a result of God's compassion and his mercy on those who are in need. And that passion of God has not run out to this day. It is still available in abundance. Jesus took him aside from the crowd by himself. Oh, I read that to you. Sorry. It's the third slide. And he gave them orders not to tell anyone. Now, I love this part. He gave them orders to keep quiet. Now, Jesus has done this several times. And I want you to notice, but the more he ordered them, did you catch that line? The more he ordered them, the more widely they continued to proclaim it. And I wish John were here, because if John were sitting right there by you, I would say to John, maybe you better tell us just to keep quiet and then we won't be able to. Okay? maybe we'll just keep opening our mouth and tell everybody how great Jesus is. Maybe you should just tell us to be quiet. Because the more he told these people to be quiet, more widely they proclaimed it. They were utterly astonished, saying, "He has done all things well. He makes even the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." That's incredible, isn't it? That is just absolutely amazing. The enthusiasm and the joy of having Jesus in their life caused them to not be able to keep their mouths shut. And he needed to, because, when you go back to the Syrophoenician woman before the crowds came, why did Jesus go there? He was exhausted. And if you read the story in the other Gospels, you realize that simply hundreds of people just continued to flow into where he was on, may I say, vacation, trying to recreate himself. He spent that recreational time healing and restoring and forgiving. As an exhausted Son of God, he poured himself out. He couldn't stop. What does that tell you about Jesus? He's not tired of us. Is that good news? He is not tired of us. Today, we are the ones who seem to be quiet. Isn't that interesting? And he hasn't even told us to be quiet. He's told us to open our mouths and just talk to everybody about this. But it seems like today we're the quiet ones. What a transition has happened in culture and society. Okay, how many of you have ever been in a place with your phone on when you got a tornado warning? Where your phone goes off, meep, 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 and you look down, it says tornado warning. Okay. I just thought I'd just show you what was at the RV park in Michigan when we were there. And this is one of the more calm pictures. I didn't want to totally scare you. Just a few minutes after this was rolling through, a tornado formed further south of us and headed down. Somebody took a picture of it. I don't know, Mary or somebody saw it. And this was like the calm ordinary, just like a thunderstorm. So just in case you wanted to get a sense of what a potential tornado looked like, the area that you aren't seeing is what's directly over our head. And that's when you see that long tubular cloud rolling in on its side. And you're in an RV park and you're going, I wonder if the tip outs, 14,000 pound RV, I wonder how many times it bounces if I'm inside of it. Would you rather be in or out? You'd rather be out. Yeah, kind of me too, because Sherry puts a lot of heavy canned goods in there in the kitchen. Could be very dangerous. Well, in the midst of that tornado, it was so interesting to watch people's behavior. I don't know how many had a concept of God, but I know one young lady, had to be probably in her late teens, early 20, climbs up the ladder and gets on top of her dad's RV so she could get her cell phone out and take a picture and post it with her friends. What would you tell her? What advice would you give her? I gave her advice. I'll just share it with you, then we're going to pray. Might change how you think of me. I said, why don't you lick your finger and hold it up? Then I will feel much safer. Well, I never saw her do that. But I just thought I'd share a little bit of our last trip with you. It was pretty exciting. That was just about 3 weeks ago when we were in that lovely storm. And I'm so glad it passed without any damage or any injury.